Okay, we're all ready. Calling to order the July 9th, 2015 meeting of the Stoughton High School Building Committee. Being a quorum present, thank you all for coming on this July afternoon, or evening, excuse me. Item number 1, public participation. For those watching at home, this is a point of the meeting that the committee sets aside for people from the community to address the committee with any statements or questions. We're sort of limited on what we can discuss due to the open meeting law to action on anything that's brought up, but we can certainly listen to any concerns, and if it's something that the committee seeks to discuss further, we'll put it on an agenda item for a future meeting. Having said that, if there's anybody here who would like to address the committee, please stand up, identify yourselves, and grab a microphone too. Hearing and seeing no one. Great. Item number 2, MSBA space plan template. I assume that's you, Scott, or Carl?
Or me?
Carl.
I guess I'll start there. This isn't part of our show there, but actually the agenda tonight pretty closely mirrors the first submission that we're going to make to the MSBA in September, which is called the Preliminary Design Program. It's a lot about the educational program, but there are some other related parts to it too, which Scott will share with us in a minute. But an important part of this, as I say, is the educational plan. And it includes this form, and I'm intentionally not passing it around because it'll hurt your eyes, but it's a MSBA form that is required for every project, and it's not only the format is theirs, but there's the first column talks about the existing school, so you have to fill out every space in the existing building. How many classrooms are there? How big are they? And it goes through these are general classrooms, special ed, art, music, cafeteria, gym, every space in the building. In the middle it's blank right now, but will be filled in. That's the proposed program. So again, for every space in the building, we list how many classrooms, what size classrooms, how many science labs, what size, going down. And as a guide, on the right side of the page is the MSBA so-called template. They have guidelines for schools based on enrollment. And this is an Excel spreadsheet. So as soon as you put in the enrollment, and for Stoughton High School it's proposed as 1,065 students. That's already been agreed upon before we even came on, between the town and the MSBA. As soon as we plug in 1,065 students, it populates this whole column. So, and we have to temper what this means, but I'll just read you, some of the highlights there. For instance, it says in their guidelines there should be 37 classrooms, general classrooms of 850 square feet. There should be 10 science labs of 1,440 square feet. There should be, and I shouldn't use the word should, but it suggests there could be 8 special ed classrooms, 8 small group rooms, and so on down the list. And those guidelines are based on sometimes requirements, like the size of a classroom is one of the spaces that they have limits on, general classrooms. The size of a science lab, they have limits on. Some other things they're a little more flexible on, but sometimes, as I say, in certain categories, they are requirements. But it is titled guidelines. It doesn't mean we have to strictly follow that. That's, in fact, they're suggesting we shouldn't necessarily just follow that. We need to develop an educational plan on our own for Stoughton, with the superintendent, with the principal, with the people locally in the district to determine what is needed for Stoughton. But they do compare whatever we ultimately propose against their guidelines, and part of our submission will be kind of a justification as to why we think we need, let's just pick one category, 40 classrooms instead of 37. So even though they call it guidelines, they do kind of hold it as a standard to measure programs against. And ultimately, they'll tell us that the reason for doing that is to control the size of buildings statewide. They need to have some kind of common baseline standards that they can't allow communities to just build as much space and in many different categories as they want. They have to justify it, and it has to be held against some kind of standard. So, and I just want to share that with you because it's a form you'll see again as we move through this process. And in fact, for the next meeting, we will have this filled in a month's time with proposals, no doubt. And it may not be the final, but it'll be a preliminary. And we'll point out the differences and the justifications for each category as we move along. So that's the space summary form. I just wanted to share that with you as part of the
Quick question,
of
Carl.
what's coming. Yes, Joel.
The guidelines, are they solely MSBA or also DOE? Or a combination of the two?
They're MSBA except for the category of special ed.
Okay.
Special ed is the one where the Department of Education, it's actually called the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, DESE. They review the special ed. And that's one category where the MSBA actually sort of are hands-off. They'll say, if you get it approved by the DESE and you want 10 special ed classrooms because you can justify it in your system, they'll endorse that.
Okay.
Yeah. But otherwise, they're all MSBA categories, Joel.
Thank you.
Maybe just before you leave that, Carl, just point out who needs to sign that at the when it's completed and approved.
Well, ultimately, we sign it as the architect because it has to do with drawing plans, certifying that the size of the building meets the size called for here and the size of the classrooms and all. And since the architect is drawing the plans, we can certify that the rooms are the right size and so forth. So on this form, it's the architect that signs off on. On the educational plan, they'll want the district to sign off on that. And then that's more the narrative, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But and in that case, the district can choose as to whether the school committee needs to endorse it or just the superintendent. But it is, the educational portion of the district that has to sign off on the educational plan. So,
Tim, Tom, anything else? Anybody from the committee?
I think we're going to be meeting tomorrow on our working group session. I think we'll
Right.
go into more detail, especially with Dr. Rizzi being available tomorrow. So,
Great. Site options matrix.
just to jump in real quick, and Scott will fill in. I did put this little graph that Carl sent to me is regarding the families of options, and you can see it's not filled out, but it just gives you an idea of how DRA and all of us are looking at things as we go through this. But the options, as you could see, there's some of the things that we already started to look at. We crossed out. We don't have them filled in, but Scott and Carl will step in right now and talk about where we're going from here. So.
okay.
Okay, as Carl pointed out, the preliminary design program, our first submission to the MSBA is going to, these are the major components in that, is the educational program, which will consist of that space summary that Carl just pointed to, as well as the educational program, the narrative, the diagrams, the results of our visioning sessions, all of that information related to the educational program. The existing conditions evaluation, that's a pretty thorough part of the volume, the submission. And we've started on that effort. This week, all of DRA's consultants have been out to the site. I believe that the technology consultants came out today. They met with some people from the technology department for the district, but all of our disciplines, HVAC, electrical, plumbing, fire protection, civil engineering, landscape architect, they've all reviewed the existing conditions. They'll be putting together reports for each one of those disciplines. DRA will be putting together an architectural report of the whole facility, and that'll be a big part of the effort going into the PDP. And then identifying the preliminary alternatives, which is, we've got a little bit of discussion about that this evening, but it's looking at, it's sort of setting up and telling the MSBA, these are the options that we're going to look at during the next phase of the project. We don't get into it in detail for the preliminary design program. We just tell them what we're going to be investigating, and that family of options that you see in your packet this evening, that identifies some of the options that we're going to be looking at. So we've seen this graphic before, just identifying the different sites around town that we would consider. And we're starting to develop this site selection matrix, which I think everybody agrees it's almost as obvious as this. We could get into more detail with a numerical rating system with more criteria, but what we did is we took the 10 properties that we were looking at, Line Lumber, Bird Street, Parcel A, Parcel B, Cabot Place Golf Course, Washington Street, Parcel C, soccer fields, Little League fields, and identified here the primary deficits with these, whether it's ownership, location, access, or buildable area. Excuse me. There were very few. There were very few pros to them, and the most significant thing was this one here: is the buildable area. You can see that 7 of the sites were kind of thrown out because it just doesn't have sufficient area to support the building, the size of the building that we need, and the associative fields and parking and access roads. So we see that the existing Pearl Street has advantages for all of these criteria that we've listed. The other comments, the Line Lumber, public safety, it's earmarked for the public safety facility, as we've discussed. The Bird Street property is conservation land. The golf course has this easement through the property, which brings it into being a problem in terms of the buildable area. And then the replacement fields and the original use of the soccer field being a landfill, those are some primary negatives about those sites.
The only issue with Line Lumber, who the owner is, it's identified as an option for the public safety building?
That's probably the big, because
Criteria?
the buildable area was okay. The location, that was a fairly central location,
Not too bad.
but it was
Not as good as current, but
I think we came to the conclusion that you had to buy some lots in order to make the whole thing whole, so that's why you
to
got
get frontage on there, yeah.
owner, so it would require.
Purchase.
It seems like
yes.
that's the only real viable option.
Mhm.
If, alternative to the school building that's there, but that's got it all.
So I do think, though, and whether we do it now or we do it later in the meeting, but we do want to take a vote that validates that, because if you remember the last time we took a vote to say we're going to focus on these, but we never sort of took a vote to say we're going to eliminate these or solely focus on the high school. And
I'll make a motion right now to focus only on the Pearl Street location for the Stoughton High School.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion on that?
So is this going to be a problem if we vote this early to?
Oh, do we have a
eliminate
quorum?
everything?
Yeah, we do. Okay.
Yeah,
in regards to
With the MSBA, you mean?
yeah.
I don't believe so.
No.
I think
Well,
we've
if they-
given
if
due
they have a problem with
diligence.
it, they'll tell us it in
I think
Yeah.
we
20
also
days.
said that in our
Yeah.
prior vote too, is that we
Yeah.
would,
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
so,
Well, 7 of them are off the table because there's not enough buildable area. You've got to eliminate them. And now you're down to 4, of which one is the high school. Of those 3, I don't think you can repurpose the conservation land just because it's getting CPA funding. And then whatever parcel A is, it's going to require a purchase, which is not in the budget.
Mhm.
I think also it's important to point out, we combed the town for it. I mean,
Mhm.
these were the only options out of all the town parcels that we looked at. And we looked at all parcels that would meet our, just the size
Right.
But you don't want to
requirements,
compete with public safety, obviously. That's an important consideration
Oh,
for
yeah.
other people
Yeah,
in town
absolutely.
as well, so you kind of.
I just don't know if they don't have the same requirements as the school
No,
does, so they must
No,
have
not nearly as large.
other places or sites that they're looking at.
Well, they have public safety.
The police chief has said that he could go anywhere because his people are basically on patrol. It's the issue with the fire department. The fire department has certain regulations as to where one station is versus the other station, and their call times, and their so there is some restrictions on where that building can go.
Right.
We did the same thing on the public safety. We took a look at all available land, including some areas that we thought we could be able to buy and so on and so on, but this really stood out as the most logical place.
Oh, it's a great site. Yeah, we definitely need to use it for something.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I'll add also that the Bird Street property too, there is a covenant on that land. So if that was to be used for any use, any part of that was taken over for any other use other than conservation land, that would need to be replicated somewhere else in town. So
So again, there's another cost.
the land doesn't exist, yeah, we would have to purchase land to replace that.
Someone says it's not a one-to-one either.
Pardon me.
Did I do that? I think it's more than one-to-one.
It can be, it can be.
Acreage-wise.
Mike said that, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Also, the property that we looked at over on Turnpike, some of that property is now for sale. Did you see that?
Privately owned
Mhm.
parcels?
Over by, at the end of Pleasant and Turnpike, that property over there?
Yeah,
T.L. Edwards
yeah, it was.
property.
You mean TJ's office?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Well, we
TJ's
have
office.
it on this list.
Bad
No,
location.
It's now come up, it's now posted for sale.
Oh,
The
yeah.
one that's next to the asphalt plant?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. I was looking forward to that.
Wouldn't be the large parcel.
Probably right behind you.
Trying to think who else would own land around there other than T.L. Edwards.
Everything that I could see on the assessor's maps was all Edwards.
And I spoke with him, just as a courtesy, I thought, that was the,
Either Terry, TL, or Edwards Associates, or Edwards LLC, or it's still Terry, but it's, maybe it's the children or something like that. So, but every parcel that I looked at over in that corner was all the families. Let's put it
Well, we've
that
been looking at this for a while now and going back and forth, and I'm in favor of passing this motion so that we can concentrate on what we feel is going to be the most productive area for either the new school or a renovated school, one or the other.
Yeah, because if that motion hadn't been made, I'd make a motion to disallow certain properties based on the criteria. So we're not going to buy because that takes away from
Right.
the funding. We should eliminate anything that's not buildable. And the conservation land is going to cause us to spend a lot more money. It's almost like an acquisition. So there's 8 properties that go away.
Yep.
But I like this motion.
yeah. There's nothing further. The motion was to identify the Pearl Street location as our preferred location.
Well, maybe if the motion, the motion is to adopt this matrix as this committee's matrix evaluation.
Or is that
I
a,
did say that.
Yeah.
did you? It
That's
was-
what you said. That's what I remember hearing. That.
Right.
You heard that too.
I
right?
did.
Yeah.
I seconded it.
Seconded.
With Pearl Street being the preferred option, right?
The only option.
Well,
Saying that in the
No,
motion?
we're adopting this matrix.
Yeah.
We're
I know
adopting this
we've got
matrix.
green in
Well,
there,
we
but I don't
have
know
a-
what that means.
Well, we have a-
There's
we have
no
a-
scale or code or legend.
Well, we have a previous from last meeting that basically said we're focusing on Pearl Street.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm trying to get at is I just think that we need the committee to say that other options are off the table. So you're right. I suppose we could maybe put a thing on this that said the yellow, the green is positive, and is for consideration, and the red cross marks are not for consideration.
Can we just take what Roberta said and morph it into what Rick was saying, excluding everything but the
But
Pearl Street?
Yeah.
Pursuant to, Roberta, how about pursuant to the matrix presented to us, that we're excluding all but the existing Pearl Street location as
From
our-
further consideration.
for further consideration? Is that,
That's
For the
fine.
MSBA project.
and can you
Yeah.
renew a second on that,
That's
Joel?
I remember.
Or Michael?
Upset.
Okay. Any
Remember
further
you saying
discussion on that? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Right.
Opposed? You got that, Dom?
exciting as possible.
These are taped too, so you can rewatch it.
Maureen is the second. I got it.
Great.
Well, anticipating that, we produced the graphic that's in your handout, which is a format we've used before as kind of a decision tree, where every diamond is a decision, and then the green rectangles at the bottom are the options, obviously theoretically. Although they are probably fairly close to the number of options that we'll end up looking at. So we just made the first decision, so to speak, which site, the existing site or new property. So all these are crossed out. We did look at 10 properties, and so those are off the table. So now we're on this half of the chart, and the next major decision is, is it using the existing building, or is it going to be new construction? And new construction has a certain number of options. You remember we showed some already in our earlier studies. We have some. I guess we have. Well, that's renovation addition. I'm sorry. I went in the reverse order, but.
Well, the new construction we have on these.
Yes. So, and again, the thing we'd want to clarify with MSBA, this is one of the things we'll talk about at the kickoff meeting, is when we say there's a number of options for new construction, to our minds as designers, it means we have an educational program. That program can be configured in a few different ways. The building might take a certain shape, might be a certain number of floors, but also the options are where is the building located on the site too. And so, and in some cases where the site is fairly limited, you can't take, this kind of a shape and put it anywhere on the site. That solution for the building is also specific to that part of the site. And if we go to the next one, if we have a courtyard building, it can't go anywhere on the site necessarily either, because it has certain dimensions and certain access points. But there are at least, and we've shown, let's call it a scheme with wings, an option that's a courtyard, and the courtyard can move, if we go to the next one, Scott, to be either in the corner of the site or more central to the site. Remember, the site continues, the green part of the site. The middle school is here, the elementary school is here. But this dimension starts to get tight if we were to put it further down with this shape building. But there's another option too of a different shape. I don't know if we have one more. No, we don't show that one more. There might be.
It's a good picture of me, isn't it? Yeah. I wish I looked that good all the time.
So when we talk with the MSBA, right now in this family of options, we're showing what, 1, 2, 3, 4. There may be more than that. There may be certain solutions for the building and multiple locations for that kind of building on the site. So we want to clarify with them what it means, when we talk about options, because one of the things we'll find, we'll all find, the trend now with MSBA is they want us to sort of focus in on a solution very early on, even though we're trying to be very theoretical about this and keep it at a high level and talk about, little rectangles here and not buildings, not designs yet. They want to see it as designs and as early as possible. And we want to clarify with them to make sure that says, well, if we decide that, the courtyard shape building is the preferred solution for the building, we may still want to be able to look at, 3 options of where that's located on the site. And just be clear with them when we meet with them on, the 20th, I think, as a kickoff meeting. So, but that's just to explain why there are multiple options under the new construction. And so likewise, if we go backwards, there are multiple options for addition renovations. Here we're a little more systematic about how to think about it. If you look at, this as a spectrum, and you see we've already labeled this family B, so we're using that same nomenclature, B1. So there's B1, B2, B3, B4. So we've shown 4 possibilities there, and the easiest way to think about them is how much demolition is involved, how much and conversely, how much new construction is involved. So B1 has the least amount of demolition, the least amount of new construction. And in other words, or said another way, it saves most of the existing building. It's only demolishing the oldest portion of the building, so-called A building there, replacing it with what might be a new entry. And it builds some new space on the parking lot side of the building to the, I think that's east actually. And you know, it may be that this new piece, and it'll sound familiar to Roberta, this new piece is a gymnasium, and we take the old gymnasium and turn it into a library. And that's a way to salvage as much of the building as possible. That's just on a theoretical basis, without doing much more than that, that's one option. A little further, next option up the scale says we'll demolish the gym, locker room wing, and A building, and replace that maybe with a bigger piece of new construction that ties these 2 wings together. Maybe that's the learning commons now, and you've got classroom wings, and you've got kind of a more, tries to be a more central learning commons, and maybe a new entrance from Pearl Street. And this is a new gymnasium, replacing that gymnasium. So that's a second option. If we go a little bit further, and demolish and say, you know, we need to demolish more of the classroom wings, that they're unacceptable, they're not the right size, they're not configured the way we want them, we may end up demolishing a building, the gym, and a classroom wing. And in this option, this actually shows placing the gymnasium here and a bar of classrooms back here to replace these classrooms. And then the fourth, B4, is sort of the most drastic, where the only thing salvaged is the auditorium cafeteria wing. The entire rest of the building is removed, and some amount of new construction in some kind of configuration is constructed. You know, this shows actually, you know, wrapping around the existing building. There's certainly an option that does all the new construction kind of independent of the existing building, so that you don't need any swing space. You keep the existing school in operation, build an entire new wing, make the connections into the auditorium cafeteria, and then tear down the building and replace it with fields or parking lot. But, you know, in this case, you sort of have raw ends of the building. If you demolish these wings here and don't put new construction there, you have to do something. You know, that building, it's the newest building, so when it was built, you know, it doesn't have exterior enclosure at those points where it joins. So, but those are generically, you know, 4 addition renovation options we think, you know, deserve further study, and the MSBA would agree, I believe, on that. And then, sort of going in reverse order, then the furthest over of the options, the category A would be, if we just go to the overall picture of the existing school, yeah. This is saying we don't do any demolition, we don't do any new construction, or maybe, you know, very minor. And look at that. So it's purely a renovation option. That assumes that there's enough space in the existing building, and we have to verify that. We don't know that's the case right now. But again, generically, it's an option. And it also doesn't mean that, you know, we live with the existing spaces as they are in the building. It might be that it's a total gut. We take out, you know, we leave the exterior enclosure, but we're taking out all interior partitions. And restructuring the building and doing some other conversions of spaces, you know, to get an acceptable gym, to get an acceptable library, to get, you know, things adjacent to other parts of the building to satisfy the education plan. And it may prove that we can't do that, but generically we want to keep it on the table. And then further over, it doesn't even deserve a letter because it's just the base repair option, because it's, again, it's a requirement of MSBA, but it is useful in any of these considerations. We want to know what it would cost just to fix what's broken, is the simplest way to say it. Without changing any walls, without, you know, responding to the educational plan, but just looking at bringing the roof, the windows, the enclosure, the heating system, the finishes, structure, just bringing all those systems up to speed, up to code, up to current standards, how much would that cost? So we want that as kind of a baseline. And whatever that is kind of inherently included in any of these, you know, to a certain extent. If we're doing any renovation, we have to do all these things as part of it. But, you know, it's always kind of informative to know what that number is. People always want to know what it is in comparison to anything. Even if we end up building new, they want to know how much would it be just to fix. And the other thing that, you know, to keep in mind when we start looking at these in a little more detail, this base repair may or may not qualify for any reimbursement from the MSBA. Yes, they do have monies to do, you know, roofs, they do have monies to do boilers, but there may be a lot more involved. And also, they make a judgment that if you're truly extending the longevity of a deserving educational facility, then yes, you'll qualify. But they're not going to, you know, sort of spend, you know, good money after bad. If the school's not worth investing in, then you won't qualify for that reimbursement for the boilers, roof, windows, and so forth. And so that really opens eyes when you realize that, you know, you might have to foot the bill for this 100% yourself if you don't approve one of these other new ones where you do get some, you know, reimbursement. And that, again, is an equation that people often want to see and understand in cases like this. So this is a format that I think, you know, is straightforward and simple enough that people can understand. And then as we start the nomenclature, you know where things fall in line. When we start talking about B5 or C6, you'll know it's you know, the sixth option of new construction or something in that category. So I think that's what we wanted to talk about in terms of options. There, right, Scott? And then the next would be summarizing the educational plan.
Can I stop you for a second?
Yes, TJ.
I just want to confirm, and this is stepping back half a step, when we confirm the site that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciating that these are all old schematics before we actually went into a discussion of site, but the site now we're considering, the Pearl Street site, includes everything on both sides.
Right. It extends, you know, to the full amount of town property. We'd say it that way.
Yeah, I just wanted to confirm that.
Not that we're going to touch the middle school or touch the elementary school, but that the entire town-owned parcel would be considered the Pearl Street parcel.
Just a point of clarification.
That's a good point, yes. Yeah.
Right.
And that's why there could be so many options for new construction, too. So it's not just immediately adjacent to the existing building. It could be a little bit further away.
Thank you for that.
Okay.
And, great. Moving on, as you started in the educational plan update.
Go ahead. Yes, please.
One of our big initiatives over the last month before school let out for the summer was getting together with a large congregation of the faculty with some of our programming experts, both in-house and a programming consultant that we use, Frank Locker, Educational Planning. And this is a brief, what I handed out is a brief summary of what we accomplished over effectively 2 full days of all different types of workshops and discussion groups and presentations and looking at some videos that Frank had prepared. And there's, as a result of this effort, there's going to be a larger, more comprehensive document that is going to be generated that records all of the, records and interprets all of the information that was discussed and information that was gathered over those couple of days. It was really productive. I think everybody had a good time doing it, and we learned a lot about where the existing facility falls short in terms of the vision that a lot of the educators here at Stoughton High School have about what the opportunities could be with different environments for teaching and learning.
Maybe Julie could tell us who was there, you know? You could summarize who was there, Julie, in the group. No, just roles and how many, the quantity.
We had 22 people. It was comprised of administration, faculty, department heads, district administrators, and some community members, some students and some parents.
Yeah, it was a very effective group. You know, it was diverse, and it was people willing to share, you know, their thoughts and their experiences, because there were some longtime teachers there, as well as some very young new teachers.
Yep. So the culmination of these efforts is to have some ideas. When we talk about an educational program, we're talking about sort of a narrative that gives us direction as a design team, that facilitates us transitioning between an understanding of what the facility needs to be from an educational standpoint, and learning a lot about the teaching and learning modalities that exist in your high school and where you want to take that in the future. And writing up a very comprehensive narrative as to, in words, as to what our objectives are before we start any of the architectural planning. I'll point you to the last page here that has this diagram in it, and that's sort of the culmination of, or a nice way to sort of synergize all the efforts that went into these couple of days. And when you look at these architectural diagrams, and this is a kind of a difficult concept to grapple with, because these diagrams, although they sort of look like they could be a gesture as to where the elements will be organized in a floor plan, we have to understand that this obviously isn't just a one-floor building spread out all over the place. The diagrams are really talking about connections between things and communicating spaces and adjacencies. And the floor plan may look entirely different than this, but this is the way that we're going to start when we start moving from ideas and concepts and narratives to an architectural language. Is we first want to start doing it in diagrammatic form so we can keep it very gestural and talk about the connections, and make sure at each point when we're diagramming, we check back in with the administrators, we check back in with the building committee, and make sure that the gestures are moving in the right direction. We don't jump right into doing floor plans and coming at floor plans and saying, well, this, you know, these are where the classrooms are located, and this is how a classroom is laid out. It's much more sort of collaborative is the word I'm looking for. It's much more collaborative, that we sort of like to bring everybody along in the process, and the diagrams are a great tool to make sure that before we jump into architectural floor plans, we're really satisfying some of the things that we hold as being important in the original educational program, the educational narrative. So that's about it.
Yeah, we're going to, as Dom said, we're going to continue to work on this in the working group sessions too. This is a draft, not the final yet.
Questions from the committee?
And just one other thing to wrap up the educational program. I think, yeah, Dom included in your package the excerpt from the MSBA requirements of what an educational program has to touch on. I think it might have been a second page too, but the gist of it wants to understand, what are you doing now, what do you want to be doing in the future in these categories. You know, some very basic information: what size, what grades do you serve, what size classes are you what do you have now and are you proposing, all these categories. So that's what the educational plan ultimately will entail, and it usually ends up being 20 to 30 pages long, something like that, of narrative and some diagrams.
Single spaced. I hope so.
So,
Schedule update. Dom, Tim?
Well, real quick, I've attached the schedule we've been carrying, but I just wanted to highlight that the MSBA meeting is on the 20th, which will include the tour of the facility. So I think that'll be helpful as we go down the path that we're going here in selecting the preferred option. Also, I wanted to make sure that we didn't lose track of this, but we talked about making a presentation to the school committee on the 28th. I'm not sure how far we've gotten with that, but I wanted to make sure that that we should address that maybe tomorrow in the working group. And reach out to the school committee for an audience with them. So those were the two items that I wanted to make sure that those milestones were appeared and that we're going to follow through with. So right now, we're all set for the 20th. The MSBA is on board. We'll be meeting in the school committee conference room on the 20th and going from there.
Do we know who's coming from the MSBA?
I have not heard back yet from
Okay.
from
I know it's going to
Sarah.
be Chris Ailes anyway.
Chris Ailes and Mary Piketty are definite because they were circling that. I don't know of anyone else right
Okay.
at this moment. I did request it. I haven't heard back.
Joel?
Who's supposed to be there? 9 o'clock.
9 o'clock.
Yep. At the MSBA kickoff meeting, I did send out electronic invitations to everyone that should be there. Okay. I don't think you were on that, right, Joel?
Nope, I wasn't. That's fine. I didn't want to be there.
No.
That's my point.
I didn't think you'd want that.
Typically, this meeting is
it's the
held
chair.
in Boston.
It's chair, also the town manager, education, Julie and Maggie were invited.
She didn't get
Well,
it.
maybe it was just Maggie that I invited, and I think, Julie, you were the backup.
All right.
Oh,
If
I'm
Maggie
not being
couldn't
the
make
backup.
it, but she's going to be there, so.
Typically, this meeting is held in Boston, not usually out at the district. And so it's not a public meeting, it's a business meeting with the MSBA, and they generally, I think, don't like to see giant groups of people at that kind of meeting because it's a real business type meeting. That's kind of a discussion around that.
We have to post it, right?
No.
And that's about it.
Great.
Any further questions?
MSBA kickoff,
Yeah, they'll go through that.
it's not in here yet, or is it?
Pardon me?
MSBA kickoff in this timeline?
It might not have been because
not
when
been
we did
updated
this,
in
it
this-
wasn't,
okay.
it wasn't decided
I
on.
think,
Yeah.
I think we were still
7/20.
fighting with them to get into June, so this will be updated.
Yeah, you got it down for June 18th.
June
which is
18th,
the
yeah,
original
yeah, right, which is the
idea.
original,
Yeah.
so,
But that doesn't hold anything up.
no.
No.
And as we've mentioned before, this
We're-
is really a meeting for
It's really
procedure.
procedure,
Procedures,
right?
yes,
exactly.
No
Well,
decisions
we're
will
going to be
made.
able to preview some substance because it's been delayed.
Right.
That's positive. But just to get a feed
Mm-hmm.
that we're on the right track with them.
Yeah, I think we're much further along than normal, so,
Normally, it is just procedure, but, we've been at this now for a few months.
We're special.
Special,
Special.
there you go.
So, next up, bills.
Bill's,
I have
the only we only have the vendor invoice package is really Compass's invoice.
I got DRA.
Oh, you did get DRAs?
You get some out?
Okay.
We're supposed to pay DRA?
Okay, so,
Only if we do a good job.
all right.
Let's vote on that.
So, is there a motion to pay Compass invoice number CPM 4905 for 7,120? So move second. Further discussion? All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
And then we have an invoice for DRA for the amount of $81,250. This is work for their feasibility study work from June 1st to June 30th.
Is there a motion to recommend payment? Is that the motion we're supposed to be
right?
making again?
Motion to recommend.
We didn't bill in June.
I think that's-
It's our first bill.
Okay.
We're 2 months behind with
Oh,
DRA.
okay.
Did we figure out that's the correct motion? Motion to recommend payment? Okay. Motion made second. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Great.
Right, I just a
Confirm
matter,
future meeting? Yeah.
So DRA is sending this directly to Maureen. We should make sure that Mary Coppins also
No,
gets it.
actually, you need to send, I was going to bring this up after the meeting. You need to send that to us before this meeting so we
Right.
can
You can put it
recommend
forward.
it. Because we're not supposed to be passing on invoices that we can't recommend. So I'm okay because I think we've talked about this, but we need to get it beforehand.
You just got it, so, yeah.
Yeah, our bookkeeper had surgery, so we were rushing with a replacement to get it out to you.
Excellent.
Minutes of June 18, 2015. Has everybody reviewed? And is there a motion to accept?
You made the...
I made the changes, and that should be in your package. When I sent it out earlier this week, Joel made a comment on a couple of items which I made changes on.
Yep, looks good. Move we accept.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous? And future agenda items. Well, first of all, next meeting would be on
August 13th,
August 13th, is that right?
second Thursday of the month?
Yeah, second Thursday of the month, August 13th. right.
August 13th, and that's for the public as much as anyone. Me too, though.
What do you anticipate being able to present at that meeting, Carl?
As we said, we'll have updated educational plan, which includes a space summary
Okay.
at that point in time. And we'll probably have some work, obviously, on these options, too.
Will you be doing a distribution prior to the meeting so that we can look at it before we get here?
We always try to do that when we can. Yep.
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Are you required to do so many options?
Yes.
So many
We need a
Yes.
copy because we need to
Yes.
keep it.
Because I look and I say some of them I just find absolutely, in
Well,
my opinion,
that-
God, you have to.
yeah, just like the sites, we have to sort of do
Okay.
due diligence, and some of them will fall off the table pretty quickly.
Okay.
What
Yeah.
the MSBA doesn't want to see is you walking in the door saying, this is it.
Well, I know, well, it was different down the street because we had water issues.
Yeah, yeah.
We had two options, and we kind of, meeting, all just said, no, we don't like it, and it was done in
Mhm.
5 minutes, but obviously this is a long process.
But keep in mind, the investment in the time isn't much more than what you see up here. We're just telling them what options we're going to explore.
Right, no,
And
I know you're not going into detail, I
Right.
get all that, I
Mhm.
understand.
And it'll be
But
narrowed
do that
down.
all the way through the whole process.
Right,
I
and it'll be narrowed down dramatically as we move into the next phase toward the preferred schematic report.
I mean, I look and I guess the other thing too is gonna be the cost, I mean, nobody's mentioned costs.
Don't know what we're doing yet.
That's a good thing.
I understand that, I know we don't know what we're doing yet, but, you know, you build a house, you know, it's, $200 a square foot to build a house. You kinda have an idea what it costs to build a school, you know?
Well, as I understand it,
To me, I'm clueless.
when you develop these options, there will be some cost associated with them.
Well, as Roberta says, as we develop the space plan, there's going to be a total square footage number, so everyone's free to, look up their latest cost per square foot, I guess, but
I
you
would
can't,
just
can't hold back
caution
at that
people
point.
to be careful about cost in this environment until we know what we're doing. Not this preferred option, I'm saying, but know what we're doing for these 9 options or whatever we're going to put in front of you. Just be careful because the cost environment is different now than it was a year ago or 2 years ago. Yeah. So if we could, and I know it's difficult, and eventually the public is always going to be wanting to look for costs, but it doesn't do the committee any favors to be talking about costs when we're not comfortable telling you those costs.
No, I know, but as a taxpayer and the tax.
They're going to be, it's going to be very,
Ultimately,
of
it's
course.
gonna come to the
Yep,
taxpayers,
yep.
and I think people have to realize.
No,
that.
no question.
Yes. Well-
And everybody else, all in one package.
Well, all of those options will be costed out to some extent, but let us, and at this stage, it's very guesstimate.
The reason for the
But at this
costing
stage-
out is so you can compare the options, not necessarily that they're going to be the true cost.
Right, we usually actually use a baseline, when we've done this in the past, we've done a baseline, and we basically say, what is the cost relative to the baseline? So that we avoid people driving preconceived notions without enough information. It just isn't helpful to the process.
Anything else for future agenda items? And if not, their motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Ms. Miller? I didn't see one, so oh, is it?
Motion to adjourn by Ms.
Turn it, right? Oh, wait a minute, here.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Rick.
Who made the
Well,
motion?
I want to make sure he picks it up.
Ms. Miller.
We'll get it straightened out.
Ms. Miller moved, Rick said.
Second, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Great, thank you all.
We have
See you
to
tomorrow
legally wait